Welcome to our CNCF Salzburg meetup. We are very happy to have Daniel Bryant here today, who's going to talk about Kubernetes platforms and the future. Thank you. And just start, Daniel.
Superb. Let me share my screen. Is that looking good?
Yeah. You're not in presentation mode.
Presentation mode now?
Now, yeah. Wonderful.
Super. Thank you for the invite. Thank you for the introduction. It's a pleasure to chat to folks today. So welcome to From Kubernetes to PaaS to What's Next. So I'm going to do a spoiler alert, right? I'm going to tell you what I'm going to tell you up front, kind of set the scene, help you think about the bigger concepts. This is a quite high level talk, so not much code. We're not going to be doing any live coding, anything like that, but hopefully get you thinking about the future of platforms with Kubernetes and other container tech. So the spoiler alert, I asked up front, from Kubernetes to PaaS, platform as a service, to what's next? And I think the answer is going to be golden paths. And this is just the name, right? Like DevOps, all these kind of things. But some folks are calling it golden paths, paved roads, paved platforms, IDPs, internal developer platforms. There's a bunch of names which I think are coalescing around the same concepts. So I'm going to say the old school PaaS, which I loved, Heroku, Cloud Foundry, maybe not the future, but let's have a look at what the future is. I think the real questions you need to be asking yourself as an engineer is how much of this platform should you build yourself? And how, critically, should you assemble the developer experience, the developer control plane for effective use? You plug in all these different tools together. We know and love the CNCF, right? How do you make it useful for developers to actually use day in, day out? And a little bonus bit of content I'll chuck in is I think platform engineering, another sort of buzzword, right? Coming together is also worth your time in looking into as well. So we're going to cover this golden path, going to cover the platform engineering behind it. We'll hopefully dive amongst all the concepts, and then you'll walk away with a good understanding of these things, and then a good basis to discuss and disagree. I think it's part of the fun, right, of where we think the future is going to go. Great intro from everyone. Thank you already. But at Daniel Bryant UK on most of the interwebs. Twitter is my most active place. LinkedIn is also the same. GitHub, you can find me a bunch of places. My background is Java development, software development. Did a bunch of JavaScript, Ruby, Go along the years. Moved into software architecture, then ops. And I did kind of CTO roles, building out platforms. We've already had, I think, a Pokemon reference, but my Pokemon joke is I like to collect jobs like Pokemon, right? I want to do all the different roles over the years. I've been an academic in the past as well, and who knows what the future holds. But I love software and I love helping people. That's the key two things I think in my life. Really passionate about delivering software, really passionate about sharing that knowledge, hence written a couple of books with friends of mine, and love getting involved in InfoQ, and also I blog a lot on Ambassador Labs blog, where I'm currently working as head of DevRel too. Right, start at the start. I'm hearing a lot from customers, just from the community. As developers, we're being told to shift left all the things, right? And it does make sense. Even very early on in my dev career, I was being told to think about security, scalability, reliability, maintainability earlier rather than later. It's easier, it's more cost effective to think about it earlier, but the classic QA when I started my dev career back in 2000s was to do QA at the end. And let's be honest, a lot of places it still is very popular to do quality control at the end of the software delivery lifecycle. If we are going to shift left some of these things, you need, as a developer, the abstractions, the APIs, and the tools to help you. Like even when I was a full stack developer, I knew MySQL, I knew Java, I knew JavaScript. It's just a lot to know. You chuck in some Terraform, some containers, some Kubernetes. It's just a lot of things as a developer that, the cognitive load is going to be through the roof. So if we're going to shift left something like security, we've got to have good APIs, good tools to use. We're going to shift left maintainability, need good abstractions to think about, right? I started my career UK government around 2002, I think it was, and this was like pre-DevOps, the dinosaur age, depending on age of everyone in the room, right? But that's how old I am. I was doing back-end Java development, a little bit of front-end JavaScript, and I'll be honest, the abstractions were not there. I literally handed off my Java code. Someone built an ear file at the time, deployed it, ran it. If something went wrong, they'd file a ticket, and we as developers would go and fix it. Security, we did think about it in the code level, but most of the security happened from the ops perspective. There were no tools for us, right? We literally sat next to the racks that were running all the code. Someone else maintained the racks. We didn't really deal with that. Later on in various jobs, I did start racking and stacking. But back in 2002, I was just a developer, right? I literally wrote the code and that was kind of it. Now, I think we've actually got tool sprawl as an issue, right? There was a lack of tools back when I was starting my career, but now I think there's just a plethora of tools out there, right? And I know this is a CNCF meetup, but it's mandatory to do this meme when you go to a conference, right? The CNCF landscape is amazing. It's a sign of healthy innovation, but it's also overwhelming, right? I mean, I speak to prospects, to customers who are like, hey, I just need a database. What should I choose? Just need an API gateway. What should I choose? And the landscape is super confusing, right? So I'm going to say sorry, not sorry. I love the CNCF, right? But I do think the landscape, it's just, it's an artifact of a successful community. It is a bit confusing for folks. And I do this joke whenever I go to a KubeCon, but I thought I'd put it in here as well. But it's actually my boss, Richard, who founded Ambassador Labs, said, always loves KubeCon, but the problem with KubeCon is just more tools. And remember the Star Trek reference, if you're a fan of Tribbles, it's true, right? Every KubeCon, every meetup sometimes, everything I go to is seemingly a new tool to learn. And I love that. I love learning. I'm sure you do, coming along to a meetup. But not every developer wants to learn the latest thing. They just want to solve problems. So each KubeCon, each meetup, more tools. But still, Kubernetes is a fantastic foundation for a platform. Famously, Kelsey Hightower has said it's a platform for platform builders. Basically, it's like the core, foundation infrastructure of the piece. And I truly believe that. I think Kubernetes has got a lot of fantastic potential, but you need to add a few more things on top of Kubernetes if you want it to become like your platform where you're deploying software onto it. So with that in mind, let's have a look at some core requirements of what I'm calling a platform, right? And hopefully this is not controversial. If you're looking to deploy software, web-based software, you need to code, you need to ship, and you need to run. And now I'm talking more about like code and test. Maybe it's like 4 things rather than 3, but you need to code and test, right? You need to ship. Maybe you're doing, building containers. Maybe you're doing some canary releasing, this kind of stuff. And you need to run the thing. You need to observe it, fix bugs, that kind of thing. We'll build this slide up as we go along through the next 20 minutes of the talk, but this is where I'm starting from, right? I need a platform that helps me code, ship, and run. And out of the box, Kubernetes does not help me do that. I've got to build a container. I've got to learn some YAML. If I want to do canary releasing, pretty kludgy in Kubernetes. If I want observability, very basic stuff in Kubernetes. I have to, pick some other tools like Datadog or Honeycomb, for example, for run, right? So we'll build this up. Kubernetes, fantastic foundation, but just the foundation. I did want to shout this out. I don't know if folks know Josh Long. He's very big in the Java space, Starbucksman on Twitter. Josh is an amazing human. He codes faster on stage than I've ever coded in my life. So if you get a chance to watch Josh Long, please do go and watch him at a talk. He travels the world. But he did Devox UK earlier this year, and he said, I love Kubernetes. It's my favorite YAML database. And we all had a good chuckle, right? And I tweeted it out and got a bit of traction. I was quite happy with myself. But then Emmanuel from the Hibernate team, object relational mapping, ORM framework, super smart Manuel with the databases, said, you know what? Josh is actually right. It's an API database, right? And I was like, Kubernetes, API database, YAML, got the reconciliation loop in there. And then it got even more surreal with Bryant, who is a co-creator of Kubernetes, jumping in the thread and saying, yes, this is exactly what Kubernetes is by design. It happens to be YAML, but it's the config we're reconciling, against the infrastructure, the target environment. Got some declarative definitions of what you want. Kubernetes kind of makes it happen in the target environment. And that is something to bear in mind. Kubernetes is immensely powerful, but it's pretty limited in what it does. It needs other things to actually make this stuff real. But I love that. Seeing Brian Grant in my tweets made my day, right? That was pretty cool. So let's take a step back for a minute and we'll go back to the future and we'll look back in the past. We'll also go up to sort of now on my coding career, my software development career. Now, don't worry, this table is a brain dump. I'll share the slides later on. You can look at this if you want to go in more detail. Most important thing is the years go along, down, and you can see I started coding around 2000 professionally, and sort of up until 2020 where I was a consultant. This is kind of like this kind of stuff I was working on through that time. The most important thing is I want to overlay my cognitive load, like how much energy I was expending figuring out stuff and learning new stuff along this journey, right? And spoiler alert, it gets worse as the time goes on. So I started my career as a UK government, building Java monoliths, super simple. Wrote the code, that's it pretty much, handed it off. Went into more service-oriented architectures. I started having to learn about enterprise service buses, API gateways, message queues. I was having to think about shipping my code. Some of it was going on the ESB, some of it was going in the WAR file, the Java file. I was also thinking about some of the run properties like dynamic translations in the enterprise service bus, the API gateway. Got a bit more complicated. I then went and did, and this is only with hindsight I realized this, but I then went and did a bunch of Ruby on Rails work and some Cloud Foundry work as well. And it was actually really easy. The platform provided everything for me. I just coded, did my CF push on the command line, and it packaged the thing and just shipped it, and it was running. And I used at the time a lot of New Relic dashboard. New Relic at the time was game changing, and that you could break down, RUM, real user monitoring. You could break down, the database was taking super long, the middleware was taking super long. Like New Relic at the time was game changing. So I just thought code and I thought run. The platform was just some kind of product to me, right? I just did my CF push. I didn't need to worry too much about the infrastructure. Another team was running that. And that was happy days. It really was. Then I started doing some work in the consulting space in London. Worked for a company called Open Credo. We did a bunch of work in German-speaking countries too, so you may have bumped into Open Credo. Still a very popular company, working as a consultant, boutique consultancy. And we were deliberately solving problems, so you only get to see the bad stuff. Like that was part of our job, right? So I'd go in and see a lot of hard problems, hard sort of projects that were failing or whatever. But microservices was becoming a thing around this time frame. 2015 onwards. Everyone, as I'm sure you see now, was building microservices, rightly or wrongly. And they were making engineers learn Terraform. They're making engineers learn Docker. They're making engineers learn all these other things. And the cognitive load just went through the roof. As a developer, like learning all these things and managing all these things was super hard, right? Super, super hard. So that's kind of my journey, I think. Like I like the simplicity of PaaS, platform as a service. Recognize perhaps with microservices and the cloud as it is now, it's not possible to go back to PaaS, but I want that kind of UX, right? I want that developer experience of PaaS. Oops, so I've gone too fast. What did I learn? So 3 things looking back. You can only join the dots when you look back, right? But looking back on my time as a developer, I learned 3 really important things. Treating platform as a product was the winner, whether it was a commercial product like Heroku, or I worked on a few platforms where I've treated them, my team treated them like a product. They were the most successful and the most fun projects to work on. We had dedicated budget, resources, management buy-in. We treated it as a product like any other product in the company. You can't have good developer experience without good user experience. And I come from this as a back-end engineer, right? Like I'm not talking about UI, because I remember when I was a back-end engineer and I sort of like put some UIs together, they were always horrible. Looking back, it was pretty tragic. I'm not just talking about UI, I'm talking about sort of user experience. Ironically, we put way more time into the user experience of our products and our tools than we ever do, products and tools that we offer to customers, than we ever do our own tools. And we may use that build tool every day. We may use that CI tool every day, but no time has a UX engineer ever thought about that developer experience, that user experience on that tool. I've been there, I've done this many times. The time I've had the most success is when I thought about developer experience and had some real good advice from user experience specialists. And finally, if you're going to focus on the platform, focus on the workflows and the tooling interoperability. These are the key things. So I'll power through these. I'm going to dive into each one briefly now, and then we'll kind of wrap up the overall conclusion, which hopefully will stand out as well. So platform as product. It's not a new idea, this platform as a product. If you look at many of the high performing companies like the FANGs, I know we're not all Netflix, right? But there's still interesting companies to look at, to see where the vanguard is, where the future could be. They've been talking about golden paths, paved roads, platforms for a number of years. Google have, Borg, Omega, all these different things. Netflix have like Titan, I think it was, a bunch of other products they created, and they've been talking at it at KubeCon, all these things. I first bumped into a paved road. I write for InfoQ, so I wrote this, I think the date is 2017, looking at their squinting. June 2017 is when I first heard about Netflix talking about paved roads. And they'd obviously been doing it for years, right? But they just talked at KubeCon, I think it was New York. They talked about how they were building this platform, and they focused on developer experience, making it super simple to ship code from the terminal. And I was intrigued. I bumped into Golden Paths from Spotify. Spotify have been very generous with their sort of sharing their knowledge. They talk a lot about how they had a golden path for web systems, a golden path for machine learning, a golden path for the desktop. Like, it wasn't one platform or one tool to rule them all. There was a series of golden paths, but depending on what you as an engineer were building, the golden path offered you a path of least resistance. You could get a web app set up really easy, or you could get a machine learning, training system set up really easy, or you could get the desktop software set up really easy. It wasn't one platform, it was a series of golden paths that had been treated as a product to make your life as a developer easier to get started, which I thought was super cool. I've chatted to some interesting people. Dave Sudia, he's actually joining my team in a couple of weeks' time, of all things. But I've known Dave for a number of years. He worked at GoSpotCheck, big US companies like that, and he's talked a lot about the value of platforms. So check out podcasts I've done with Dave. I've learned a lot from Dave over the years. I didn't make up the golden path. I didn't make up platform as product, but I think there's been weak signals in the market for a number of years, and now looking back, I can join the dots and say, hey, companies that are doing interesting things have really thought about platform as product. A couple of people to follow on Twitter, if you don't already. Gergely is fantastic in his insights into platform. Nikki here has quote tweeted him. Nikki's from Skyscanner and from FT.com, both saying, if you're gonna build a platform, treat it as a product. Invest accordingly, staff accordingly. Can't tell you how many times as a consultant I was brought into platforms builds where no one owned the platform, and it was like a part-time thing. If no one owns it, it's probably not going to get the attention it deserves, right? So treat it like a product. The Canonical book, I always recommend books, I mentioned up front. Fantastic book. I'm lucky enough, a couple of buddies of mine, Matthew and Manuel, I've known for a number of years, and this book is amazing. I've actually got it, I think, hidden down here somewhere. It's not a big read, but it is an essential read if you're building a platform. It doesn't tell you how to build a platform. No Kubernetes really mentioned in there, but it tells you how to treat your platform as a product, how to offer it as a service, how to build your teams around it. Awesome book. That is my standout recommendation. As a little case study, so at Ambassador Labs, we drink our own champagne or eat our own dog food. We don't like saying that, right? So we drink our own champagne is the thing. We talk a lot about how we use our own tools within our build process. So we ship Telepresence, CNCF project, Emissary Ingress, open source API gateway, and we use them in our SaaS offerings. And we've made a number of learnings over the years. And we've also made a bunch of mistakes, which we share as well. So if you want to know more, check out the website. But we've learned so much by doing migrations on our own systems, caught a few issues, fixed them before we roll it out to the open source community. Fix it before we roll it out to customers. So this dog fooding, this drinking your own champagne, super valuable. We do staff our platform appropriately. We have dedicated platform folks. We treat our platform as a product internally, which our SaaS offering runs on top. We do interviews, retros on usage. We try and share as much as we can publicly on this stuff as well. So check out the blog if you want to know more. But we've really invested in onboarding, training, that developer experience. We're not perfect, got a long way to go, but we've learned a bunch by treating the platform as a product and by using our own tools within that platform. It's been highly enlightening. On to the next one. So you can't have good developer experience without good user experience. Now, good user experience for platforms, a couple of amazing books, I read them, luckily enough, my mentors introduced them to me several years ago now. These are table stakes for understanding about UX, and I've learned a lot. I've worked with some amazing UX people as well. My advice for platforms is think personas. You probably have the platform experts, ops, SREs, those kind of folks. You have the hipster engineer. I'm sure many of you joining the call are kind of hipsters, because typically the people that are hipsters go to meetups and learn stuff. And you have the rest of the folks. And I'm not trying to be derogatory when I say 99% developer. There's a great blog post linked off that from Gene Yang. But a lot of folks I worked with as a consultant just wanted to come in, code, ship and run. They wanted to just do their work and disappear. They weren't interested in learning about the latest frameworks. They just wanted to deliver value to customers. And the 99% developer is very different than the hipster engineer who's going to like just make stuff work, right? And very different from the platform experts. I was involved in a number of platform fixes as a consultant where the platform folks had never spoken to the engineers. They'd never spoken to their customers, is how I pitched it to them, right? They go, oh, I'm just building a new Amazon. I'm building an internal Amazon. I'm building what I think the developers will want. Like, how do you know? Think personas. And then once you've thought personas, user research is key. What do you actually want as a developer? What's your biggest bottleneck today? What tool could I create for you to add the most value? Those kind of things. And do watch users using the tools. Ambassador Labs regularly jump on calls watching people use telepresence, and I've seen some wonderful and some horrendous uses of telepresence, right? I thought, how can you possibly use the tool in that way? But I learned a bunch of stuff by watching that happen, right? So chat to people, but then watch them, because what they do and say can be different sometimes. For my case study here, Argo project. Hopefully a bunch of you bumped into Argo. If you haven't, it's a full suite of products, open source, came out of folks that later joined Intuit. Amazing projects. And the UX here is just fantastic. I use this in all my teachings, all my demos. It's basically a visual representation of a Kubernetes deployment. Breaks down the deployments, the replica sets, the services, all these things. Fantastic. I know people that actually use Argo just for the visualization. The fact it does GitOps and continuous delivery, that's like a bonus. They love the visualization of Kubernetes. And I often use the CLI for my demos. Like the CLI has been engineered amazingly from a UX perspective, right? The open source projects, but they've really thought about developer experience. The GUI is probably more developer focused, the CLI more ops focused, and they've created them accordingly. And I love working with the Argo projects. Great thinking about developer experience. Final one before then doing a summary. So workflow and interop. So workflow and interop. Netflix have talked a bunch about full cycle developers. And this is this notion of shifting left, right? They get developers to do all the things, think about design, develop, test, deploy, operate, support, security, maintainability, resilience. All the things are going in there. But if you look in the middle of that diagram is the platform, is the tools. They've talked a lot about the centralized platform team acts as a force multiplier. Specialized knowledge within the tools that can be reused. They've really thought about tools, abstractions, and APIs that enable developers to shift left, but without having to like learn loads and loads of stuff. And I think like Netflix, again, we're not all Netflix. I love learning from Netflix though. Fantastic blog post by Galo Navarro talking about building a PaaS for 1,500 engineers. A lot of discussion in that blog post is around finding the right balance between standardization and autonomy, that kind of workflow, that interop, right? And I've struggled a lot with this. Like if you constrain developers too much, and I've been on both sides of it, you force them to do their own thing, right? Developers are smart. They're going to find a way of getting around your constraints. But you don't want to allow people to do anything on the platform. So it's a constant balance. I call it the Goldilocks problem. You need that like the porridge, right? The breakfast need to be like not too hot, not too cold, just right. That is super hard to do. But if you get it right, that's where the platform should be. My interop example, my case study on this one is emissary ingress and Linkerd. So I commit to emissary ingress, Linkerd, well-known service mesh, hopefully. Myself and my buddy Jason Morgan did a CNCF webinar, I think last year it was. And we signed up for it and said, hey, we'll show about using these two CNCF projects, emissary for the API gateway and Linkerd for service mesh. Both CNCF projects, they both use the Kubernetes resource model. So CRDs, custom resources, use controllers, best practices. And we were asking ourselves, like, we're going to mash these two projects together for a live coding demo. How's it going to work? And actually, because we'd adopted the Kubernetes standards, it was literally a one-line bit of config to integrate it. And both Jason and I were like, whoa, is it that simple? The answer is yes, because I've worked with a bunch of other service meshes and I love them all. They're all awesome. But integrating gateways with some of the service meshes requires out-of-band config, sidecar configuration. It's weird, auto injection, that kind of stuff. Because these two projects had treated the actual projects as sort of standards to Kubernetes, or we'd embraced Kubernetes standards, the integration was super simple. And that both myself and Jason, we hadn't, built this together, right? But we were doing this demo together. We were like, wow. And there's a bunch of other projects I've worked in, same deal. If people respect the Kubernetes resource model, the projects integrate really easily together. And this is a good example of thinking about what standards to adopt on your platform. So let's wrap it up. Final sort of 5 minutes. How we're doing pretty good for time. So where, as a community, are we now? So I think there's this need for a platform control plane emerging, right? So we've gone through the presentation, we've looked at the 3 key things, hopefully like the code, the ship and the run here, none of this is controversial, right? We need source control, we need continuous delivery, we need observability, like we sort of talked about those in our case studies. This is what we need for code, ship, run. The challenge is like, how do we as developers like consume this? Going back to Netflix or the full cycle model, like how do we actually interact with all these different things, right? That is the challenge. Got to have a Kelsey Hightower tweet in any presentation you do, because Kelsey's amazing, but he's always on point as well. This was a great tweet. If you look, it's actually 2017, April 12, 2017. That in Kubernetes world is like prehistoric, right? But Kelsey was on the money then. I'm convinced the majority of people managing infrastructure just want a platform as a service. The only requirement, it has to be built by them. And that's a little bit of a dig, right? But when I was building platforms at this time, Kelsey was on point. Everyone was building a PaaS that I was working with on Mesos, on Kubernetes, on Docker Swarm, all building their own PaaS. There was something to it, right? But Kelsey then followed up, I think it was 2 years later, by saying the delta between Kubernetes and a developer-friendly platform is where the next layer of value is and where things tend to get opinionated, that reliable end-to-end workflow. I was like, yeah, we're focusing more and more on the workflows now, right? Really interesting thinking points. This is where the golden paths are, right? If we get these things right, we've got our base platform and our golden paths that can do different things. This, I think, is where we're probably as an industry going to come together around. And how do you build these golden paths? I think we're calling it platform engineering. You know, it's becoming what I sort of said in this tweet, the new DevOps or SRE, right? And hey, I work in marketing these days. I'm like a developer turned DevRel, right? I'm allowed to do a bit of hyperbole here, but I do think much as like DevOps opened up the conversation, it's just Dev and Ops, right? That opened up the conversation. I think platform engineering is opening up the conversation around how do we build these platforms, right? And I did a whole tweet thread. I shared a bunch of research I'd done, my team had done, not just me. And it really got an interesting conversation going. It's the most popular tweet I've ever done. I was blown away at the feedback. It was amazing. So I think this is how we build the paths. I was lucky enough then to reach out and chat to some amazing people about how they built their platforms. And I chatted to the Sneak folks. I love Sneak, right? Crystal. I chatted to Veterans United over in the States. I chatted to all different sizes of companies about how they were building their platforms. And bunch of takeaways, be opinionated, share with developers the why, as well as the how when you're building it, eliminate toil, all these things, right? So check out the tweets. I've got them linked there if you want to know more, but I think this is a foundation. And I think I've got another slide, hopefully next, where, yeah, just a few key insights. We're looking pretty good for time, just to get you thinking, right, about what did I learn with all these great chats? And they're available to, you can listen to them on SoundCloud. But a lot of successful companies I was chatting to were investing in, they didn't always call it golden paths, but they were building some form of platform. Now, obviously, there's some bias here, right? Because Ambassador Labs sells platform tools, so I chat to platform people. It kind of makes sense, right? But a lot of folks I was chatting to, even just in meetups and things, were investing in creating a platform. The ones that were successful didn't go top down. They drove bottom up, developer led, and they were doing small platforms that were then evolving. Crystal talked about this perfectly at Sneak. Sneak is a unicorn, right? Sneak are huge, but she led a platform team from small acorns, and then she grew the massive trees. Developer led, bottoms up, listen to your customer, which is the developer. Crystal, again, made this point about communicating the long-term vision and the business goals. Nearly every leader I chatted to in the podcasts said you've got to map the kind of C-level goals or whatever and strategy to everyone else on the team and the long-term vision. Get them bought in. Critically, get the developers bought in, because if you build a platform and no one uses it, waste of time, right? Waste of money. Alan Barr from Veterans United said, recognize you are working in a socio-technical system. This is kind of an obvious statement, but we do forget about the humans sometimes in our work, right? Recognize that if it's kludgy to use the platform, no one's going to use it. Got to marry the technology with the people. And he talked a lot about white glove, hospitality, like concierge, looking after developers. The first few adopters of your platform, treating them really well, learning from them, giving them feedback, giving them early previews of stuff, and then working with the developers to build the bigger platform. We talked about it in Argo, but a good UI paints 1,000 CLIs, although don't forget the CLI. It's my example here. Some developers, particularly the 1% developers, the hipster developer, love the CLI. And a key thing to think about is eliminate toil for developers. We've all been there, right? That super confusing Jenkins file you've got to write, that Docker file you've got to write, that Puppet file you copy paste every time and you hope it works, right? Get rid of the toil for developers. That's part of the platform. Automate and create is what a lot of people said to remove the friction. So check out the podcast. I've learned a bunch from people that are way smarter than me, and that's awesome, right? Final thing, adopt standards. Pick your standards, pick your APIs. I saw GitOps popping up a lot, right? Not everyone's a GitOps fan, but GitOps is interesting as a kind of continuous delivery concept within Kubernetes. But a lot of people talked about the Kubernetes resource model, which is embracing CRDs, reconciliation loops, YAML for definition, all that kind of good stuff, CLI tools. So if you haven't bumped into what's called the KRM, check it out as well. Google have written about how they've sort of orchestrated, architected Kubernetes around this resource model. Hopefully, developers came through there, right? I've worked with a lot of platform teams that don't really think about developers, don't really think about their end users. But showing my age a little bit, I love the Steve Ballmer meme, right? Like this is back in I don't know 90s or whatever it was, 80s, I'm not sure, no, 90s I guess. Like where Steve Ballmer was saying like you got to focus on the developers, and times have moved on. Microsoft, right? We all know we love Microsoft as well with Teams, but do think about developers when building your platform. Steve Ballmer was on to something here. I'm not going to sing and dance for you, but you get the picture, right? So coming back, full circle, that platform I talked about, we need the code, the ship and the run. How do we interact? Like there's some kind of platform control plane we need, right? Really, I think it's a developer control plane. I've written about this, a bunch of my team have written about it, some other folks have written about it. We're calling it different things, but this notion of a developer control plane, internal developer platform, this kind of thing is emerging. It's developer focused. That's the critical thing here. It's a developer focused interaction point. And if you look, I poked fun at the CNCF earlier on, but I think the CNCF is awesome, right? And I think this top bit is really the developer control plane I'm talking about. It's that custom UI, bumping into Backstage a lot, right? A lot of people we've got our own service catalog at Ambassador Labs. Datadog just launched a service catalog I saw. A lot of people are thinking about this developer UI, this service catalog, and then how it interacts with the platform. How do I spin up a build? How do I do testing? And I think like webhooks, CRDs, APIs, this is the key. Like this bit in red kind of gets ignored. Like we do a lot of projects down below, right? But this bit in red kind of gets ignored. And I think that's where the exciting, interesting stuff is going on at the moment in this sort of like developer control plane space. Final slide to take away, final few slides. Kubernetes to PaaS to golden paths. So when creating your golden path, think about how much do you want to build yourself? How much do you want to borrow from CNCF? How much do you want to buy from other companies, right? And how do you assemble that developer experience, that control plane for it to be used effectively? Because if you buy something, build something, no one uses it, complete waste of time. Treat your platform as a product, resource, staff, management, C-level buy-in, right? Realize you've got to have good user experience to have good developer experience, and focus on the workflows and the interoperability and the standards. Think developer-led. Ask your dev teams what the important standards are for them. Final little thinking point as a DockerCon. Was it May this year? I went as a virtual thing. I was tweeting along. Kelsey Hightower again doing his thing. And this mic drop moment. I can't remember the questions how it set it up, but Kelsey fired back saying we're talking about 10x developers, the fabled 10x developer, right? That's 10x better than everyone else. And he said you don't actually want a 10x developer. They're often quite toxic, right? What you want is someone who can come in and make 10 other developers more productive. And I was like, whoa, mic drop. Pretty cool, Kelsey. And this, I think, is the role of the platform engineer. If you can get someone that can codify, empathize with developers, build out the workflows and the interop, this is where the magic happens. This is where the platform sort of begins, right? So I'll leave you on that point. So thank you very much. We'll have a bit of chat now, but you can reach out to me. Email's there. Twitter is a good place to get involved at Daniel Bryant UK. I'm on the Ambassador Lab Slack. Please do join us there. I've couple of resources here for you to follow up on if you want to know more about the interviews I talked about. Got a platform engineering guide too. I would love your feedback on those things. So I'll stop there and say thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Daniel. Thank you for this very interesting talk. I think we got to get started with the questions in the recording, and after that we stop recording, and the people that don't want to be recorded can ask their questions. So I'm gonna start first. Do you think like every company should build their own platform now, or what about smaller companies? How do you see that?
Great question. Yeah, and I go back to my buddies Matthew and Manuel from Team Topologies, and they talk a lot about every company needs a platform, but they talk about the thinnest viable platform. You know, you get MVP, like minimum viable product.
Yeah.
They talk about thinnest viable platform, and that can literally be like an Amazon service or an Azure service or a GCP service. You know, they've got some fantastic container technologies where you can literally just drop a container in, and the thing works. So I say yes, everyone needs a platform, but start simple before you get complicated. Not everyone needs Kubernetes.
Yeah, we're just in the discussion how much platform do we need?
Yes, great question.
Because we used to have a really good platform for because we're also a Java shop and we deploy to Tomcats, and we have around 8,000, 10,000 Tomcat servers or something like that, and we have a perfect platform for that. It uses SVN ops. Subversion ops. we used it before Git, kind of the same stuff that GitOps does now, but with Subversion. But it has a user interface, and developers can deploy their applications, and they can times deploy their applications at night and stuff like that. It works everything quite well. And now we're moving to more cloudy stuff, and there is no platform there. And
yeah, that sucks, right?
And all developers are like, yeah, so we try to provide a little bit platform, but we're not sure where to stop now. So that's a little bit hard.
It's really hard, and I do think definitely if you haven't read it already, check out Team Topologies. It is a really good book, and Matthew in particular. Matthew's talked a lot about the thinnest viable platform, and you can check out his talks online. Because if developers are used to one experience, and then you try and sell them on a new platform, and it's a completely different experience, they're going to be super reluctant to do that, right?
Yeah, it's the same with the business people. When you give them a new product, and they're like, oh no, that shit. But actually, it's quite good. And so after 2 years, they realize it's not that bad. But anyway, yeah. So, oh, by the way,
yeah, you got perfect. I should have known.
No, I think I totally agree with you with the thinnest viable platform. So for example, Ira and me, we are sometimes overwhelmed by the things we could do.
Yeah.
And really starting with as simple as writing a wiki article somehow helps a lot.
Yes.
So you try to get rid of the friction that you need to ask somebody or what to do. So developers can probably also easily find, okay, how do we get started on a certain topic when they find a wiki page on it.
And that's such a good point. Like that's like almost lining into the thinnest viable platform. It can literally be a how-to on how to use Elastic Beanstalk, that kind of thing, right?
Yeah, I think it will be quite interesting in the future if there is some product coming up that will fill this gap up there. Because when you're citing Kelsey Hightower, I have another one. I've just put it in the chat. So Kelsey said at the last KubeCon, I guess. So like when you go to KubeCon, it's like going to a supermarket. You don't know where. You know this one. And if you now later on that you go to when the vendors get in and they productize the stuff, then you go to a restaurant and you get a perfect prepared meal. And otherwise you have to deal with everything yourself. So that's quite a good one. And I think, as you told in this, down below there are some quite good things going on, but up there's nothing there yet. So
I mean, I think Backstage are doing at least the most sort of buzz, right, with Spotify. And I think that even if you don't invest in Backstage, the concepts talked there are at least interesting, like the tech docs they've got going on, the catalog of your services. It's at least almost heading towards that menu of a restaurant, right? It's not quite restaurant, it's a menu.
I think what the backstage people really try to solve very good is also that it's, let's say, it's somehow with these Git scanning in the background. You don't really need to think about, okay, where should I put my stuff? Where should I put my service description and so on? So you set it up once, and then it's like scraping everything. It somehow tends to know, and then it's like magic sometimes when you see things popping up in the UI and say, hey, cool, I just committed a file somewhere, and now I have my first item in the service catalog.
Yeah, that automation is super powerful, isn't it? It's like, to your point, Johannes, like once you set it up once, then you just like ding, see more things popping up, like then you know you've invested wisely. That's kind of a cool feeling.
And it also follows a little bit this the concept of the bottom up, I think, because you can start really small. So you can start in a very, let's say, just with one team, trying to solve a little use case, and then other teams see it and say, hey, cool, that's valuable, and then they also add, let's say, their backstage definition files, and then somehow probably it spreads around.
Yeah, I love that. The bottom up thing is like the most successful platforms I've seen have been driven exactly as you said. Someone else on another team goes, hey, that's really cool, how do I get that? And then it spreads.
That's actually how our internal deployment platform started. So
perfect story. Yeah.
Okay, then I'm gonna probably stop the recording here.